Hello everyone. I hope that you all are doing well. So, in this series, we are going to understand how exactly we will call to the different APIs by means of a React. Okay. So, all the React basic concepts and intermediates concepts we have covered before this particular session. Okay. So, here onwards, we are going to focus on the third party libraries and the environmental concepts which are required to execute a full stack React application. Okay. Now, if you want to access some uh, features which is not there built in React or which is not available in your own created application, we are borrowing them, right? So how we will borrow it, how we will try to access the different applications which are written in a different languages, okay? So all these things is going to happen by making a API call, okay? So there is a one very good quote. You can never understand everything, but you should push yourself to understand the system. So, how exactly the system works means a lot, right? So, basically, it's not like, okay, you are going to create an application, so you have to create everything by scratch. What you are doing, you are just fetching, you are just accessing existing created some features, some libraries, and by means of which we are creating our application enrich and it's a full-fledged application, right? But what we are doing, we are understanding the system, how exactly this environment or this particular whole application is working. So if you don't know some features, if you don't understand something, that's perfectly all right? But you have to aware that how exactly the whole application is executing, what are the environmental requirements are there, what are the different third parties are there we are going to access in our application to work it out, right? So it's like API, application programming interface. So what exactly the API is? It is a set of rules and protocols for building an interaction with the software, interacting with the software applications. So basically, mm, APIs are like of useful for two things. Okay, first one, consider you are building an application and single application is made up of n number of different languages. Maybe some parts have been written in a JavaScript, some are in by means of Angular, some parts of your application has been created by means of a React. So how these multilingual applications are going to communicate and are going to merge to create a single software. So we require some interaction, right? So consider your, I understand Telugu and you understand Hindi. So we can't communicate. We require some intermediator which understand both these languages and by means of which we can communicate, right? So API is a kind of set of rules and protocols for building, interacting with a software application. It's like a breach that allows different software systems to communicate and share information. So as I explained you before also, for instance, a YouTube API enables developer to integrate YouTube functionalities like uploading videos, retrieving some comments, managing playlists into their own applications and website. So this helps in expanding YouTube features and services beyond its platform. So API uses standardized request and response, making it easier for the developer to access and use the functionalities of a larger software system like YouTube and in a consistent and efficient way. So one more example I would like to give for this thing is um, consider I want to show where exactly my company is. So what I'll use, I just show it on a map, right? So instead of creating map by myself, by building we have to borrow the satellite, we have to collect the data to create a map. So rather than creating the whole map system by from scratch, what we do, we just ask Google, hey Google, just provide us a map API and with the keys. Obviously, you have to register, you have to request for the key. So these are the rules and protocols you have to follow. Fine, we want to use this existing created application, existing created map by the Google. But what you are doing, you have to follow the rules. Okay, the Google will provide map to you, but you have to purchase a key, or you have to fulfill all the rules and regulations, and then you can borrow the services provided by the uh, well fully uh, properly created applications like Google's, like YouTube. So we can borrow the things. So this is the one use of API. Okay, first one is the interaction. If we want to interact, we want to create a connection or interaction or merging between the n number of software which have been created in a different languages, and if we want to merge it, so we can merge it by means of this API thing. And second one is, you don't need to create everything from the scratch. Already created systems are there, you just borrow the things from there. So these are the two basics use of a API. Now API we can maybe connect by to the software, okay, to the databases, to the different of service providing things, to the data providing things. Any kind of a system, if we want to connect, we can access it by means of a application programming interface. So this particular image I found, it's really cool, and it shows that what exactly the API is. Okay, so here is the client which want to collect the honey, and hey, we need more nectar to make an honey. Okay, we want more data to make a honey. So we can't create the data, right? So for example, uh, 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 we want to collect some data to create our own chat GPT, right? So that will be really difficult, because again we have to invest 10 to 20 years to collect the data, then we able to build something like that, because we don't have a data. So better is to borrow the data. So how we will borrow? We will just request, okay, I want the nectar from the pink flower. So the valid request has been sent, where then we will call to the nectar. So here is the nectar, and server is okay, fine, I will give you the data. So after the whatever the request has been fulfilled, and after that this particular data, requested data, is written in the form of a response, and then that particular data we can use to create a chat GPT. And in this case, they are creating it as a nectar to deliver to the client, right? So how exactly it works? Request, response, or receive, and a response. Okay, so request, it means we are calling the API. First we need to call the API, hey API, I want these things. Okay, so API call is initiated by the client application via HTTP request. Now HTTP is a kind of a protocol which is responsible to traveling or sending a request and response. Okay, now this uh, API call get initiated by the client application via the HTTP request. Now, our worker, who is going to accept that? Okay, we are not only requesting, but who is going to accept that request? So our worker B is acts as an API and going to the flower and asking it, okay, I want the more next. And API transfers the requested data back to the requesting application using the JSON form. So basically, here it is, the things happening. Okay. So basically, we need to initiate the API request, then it gets received, it gets travel to the server will respond in the form of whatever the requested data or requested services you want. So this is the way API normally works. Now, next, we'll understand something about why it is important in a web development. Okay, so web application needs an API to get a data from various sources like databases, other websites, other web applications, okay, which are providing kind of a services to you, like map, like a different kind of a components or libraries. So APIs are scalable option for managing high data and request volumes. So you don't need to handle all the things like architecture and machines and all these things. You just need to just, hey, I want it. Just send a request. Okay. So it is obviously beneficial for the web development. So developers use APIs to leverage existing features and services, which is already there. Why we should create it again and again, right? Okay, fine. There are some benefits, okay, to create your own thing. And if you have that much time and that much money, then obviously you can create your own services. But developers considers that, okay, fine, these things are already available in the form of API and libraries. Rather than creating own, just borrow it. So this saves them from reinventing the wheel. Okay, so if you are inventing these things, so you may get lots of errors, time it will get wasted and all this thing. So they keep things safe by ensuring that the only authorized individuals or programs can use them. So some web APIs are free, some APIs you have to pay for it. Okay. So and obviously each and every API has their rules and regulations. You have to follow it. An API makes a website or a mobile application more enjoyable to use by integrating the data. So this is the importance of API. Now, how we are going to perform the request and response to the API. So we need one protocol, rules for transferring data and receiving the data. And that particular protocol and rule set of rule is called as a hypertext transfer protocol. So when browse so this particular concept is so common, so basic, but I'm still covering this because we are going to perform this get, post, put, and delete. So it's kind of a revision for you. And at that time, I will not explain what exactly the get will do, what exactly the post will do. You should aware about this thing. This is so basic. You already covered it in a JavaScript, and that's why I'm just giving you the raw revision kind of a thing. So when web browser or any mobile application sends a message to the server, it's known as a HTTP request. So HTTP request involves asking server for specific data or an action, getting in a response. So we are requesting and we are requesting. It means that we are sending the request and server is responding with the data, without data, maybe error, maybe kind of some codes that is embedded inside the response. So server gives us a response. The server responds by interacting with the web pages or services. So consider you hit www.google.com. So it gives you the response in the form of a Google search engine post, a welcome page, or the browser one. We see that where we enter the queries. So using APIs in a software development makes more flexible and efficient. It also enhances the security, enables the different software systems to work well together. So basically, it saves your time, saves your money, and it allows you to interact with the different applications. Now, different types of a requests are there. Okay, we can request, get, post, put, and delete. So get, it means if you want to retrieve the data from specific endpoint, then get method you can use. Post, if you want to send data from specific endpoint. So for example, you are sending a message, you are just submitting the form, whatever there inside the form, you want to put it inside the database. So this is nothing but a post. Put, this method is used to update a record or a data value at the designated endpoint. So it's a update. Delete, obviously delete. If you want to erase the data from a specific endpoint, then we can use the particular HTTP request. Now, as per your project requirement, application requirement, you can use this functionality. Now, basically, all these things are happening, okay? Now, how we will perform or how we will call, how we will implement this API call and how we use this API in a React or in a, first we will understand how exactly these things happens, and then we will go ahead slowly with the how exactly the things are happening and which one is the better solution to make a API call in a React application. So the first thing we should know, and this is a very basic concept from the JavaScript again, and that is nothing but a promise. Okay. So to understand promise, we'll just go to through the documentation. fastly because it's a basic concept and you should aware about it. So I'm just revising the concept of a promise. So promise is nothing but an object represents the eventual completion or a failure of a synchronous operation and its resulting value. Now, basically, how exactly the promise works and how exactly that this things happens. Okay, so for that we have to little bit uh, we should know about the JavaScript. Okay, so promise is nothing but an object, and what it's do, it's just gives you the thing. Okay, so promise it means consider I'm requesting something to you and you are promising me, okay fine, I will give you, just wait a minute or wait for some time, right? So either that promise get fulfilled or it will get failed, right? So consider I am requesting something to the server and server says, fine, I will promise you that I will give you the response or I will give you whatever you are requested for, right? So this promise gets saved under the promise object. Okay. Now, this particular promise contains one callback function having the two things. Okay. Either the promise resolved or rejected. Okay, so when we do these things, when we just make a API call for a sync task or some DB calls and some cryptography and some network things. So API is nothing but a we are using for the networking, a cryptography and database call. And if you want to call some APIs, then at that time we can use this things. So in this example, we have created our own promise and we are just defining it. Okay, so for definition, I have written one call function, callback function, and it has two parameters, resolve and reject. Either this promise get resolved or get rejected. Okay, when it gets resolved, what we are going to do? We are going to do this thing. Async task is complete. Okay, so to further understanding how exactly the request send and response received, so I haven't used any API call over here. I'm just using this set timeout to understand the things. Okay. So consider I am asking, okay, so after some time, what you need to do, you need to print this particular console doc, and this is nothing but a my related to the result. So if this thing happens, this logic executed, it means my request or my promise is resolved successfully completed. Now, how I have called it, okay, you called it by means of a dot then. Okay, how you, this is the promise creation. Just a minute, let me clear it. This much is nothing but we created the promise. Okay, and here we are consuming the promise. Okay, so what we created, okay, when it gets resolved, we have to print this thing and reject. We haven't written anything right now. Okay. And how we will consume this resolve. Okay. So this resolve is related to this then. Okay. If this promise is successfully resolved, then what I need to do? I want to print this promise consume. Okay. So this is my promise definition. This is my promise call or consume, and how we are going to relate this. So this is the call, and when this thing get resolved after 1 second, if it is then is related with the result. So if this promise successfully executed, this then will get executed. Okay. Now in the next slide, I just want to show you mm, how we can pass the data, okay, through the resolve. So consider sometimes resolve, we need something, right? Or we are requesting that I want the data of this particular user ID and password. So how we will do it? So you just need to pass whatever the object or whatever the data you want to pass in a resolve. So that data will get handled by then and that user thing get fetched over here. So like this, it happens. Next, how we are going to perform the resolve, how we are going to perform the reject until we haven't used the reject. Okay, so by means of a by means of a if and else you can do it. Okay, so resolve it means successfully completed the promise. Reject it means we just got an error or some problems happens in throughout our functionality. Okay, so here it is. Okay, we mentioned let the error come because we want to find out how exactly the reject works. So when error comes, what we are now going to do, we just put some parameter to the reject method. Hey, error, JS went wrong. Else, if error is not error, it means it's a false. There is no error. Then we are calling the result. If error, then we are calling reject. If it is not a error, there everything fulfilled, then there is a result, right? So this is our promise we have created. Now how we will utilize it? Okay, we can utilize it by means of a then also, and by means of a async and await also. So most of the time, it's a kind of a good interview question, like how you can fetch or how you can request the API without using dot then dot catch. Okay, you can do it by means of async and await. So how we are consuming this particular promise? It's a promise 5 itself. Okay, there is no change. So consider I am calling here promise 5. So promise 5, then I'm getting one user info, printing it, and I'm returning it. Okay. So now there is a problem. So consider I am just returning this like whatever the data is it. Okay. But it's not in the form of a JSON format or a string format or the required format. It's a response, right? So we are requesting, and this is nothing but our response. So if we try to print it and if we try to utilize it, obviously it will gives you some problem, and uh, it will just gives you the raw data which is little bit with a different structure which you don't want. Okay, consider you want that I want the user with the username only. Okay, so what you are doing, you are just returning something and you are again nesting it. Okay, cascading the then. Okay, so then whatever the then is returning, that data is available here it in a second. Then I formatted it, and I whatever the data I want the username. I don't want the whole user. So I got the username, I'm doing something with that username. If these things are not happening, then just catch the error. And again, everything happened, there is a finally block. Okay, so finally block will get always executed, and you can write whatever you want inside the finally. Basically this is the consume, how you consume the promise dot cache finally dot finally. So these things are nothing but why we are learning these things, because these things we are going to use in a fetch and access AP libraries. So at that time, I'm not going to explain you how exactly the then is working and catch and finally. So I'm just quickly just allowing to revise these basic concepts to fetch the data. Then we will go ahead. Similarly, by means of a async also we can continue. Async consume promise 5. Then we are getting the response from the promise 5, and what happens no, it will automatically get executed. We don't want it, we want that it should wait for something and then it should go ahead. So we put it await. It should wait to complete the process, right? Otherwise there will be no fruitful data we are getting. Okay, so we are awaiting until the promise file completes all its functionality, fetch the data, and then after completion of this promise we will get a response, and this response gets print. And obviously there is no then and catch and finally, so we have to write it inside the try catch. Otherwise we can't perform, we can't find out whether there is a reject or resolve. Okay, so for that we have written it try and catch. So I just want to show you there are the either ways, this one or this one. You can perform the promises, pass the request and get the responses. Now why we are understanding all these things? Because this is the basic functionality behind the fetch library. Okay, so we normally used to fetch the request and all these things with the help of a fetch API or Axios API. Okay, so only this much is not sufficient. Behind this fetch API, what we are doing behind this fetch API, this much logic is there. Okay, So we are doing this much in behind. So how exactly the here there is a, because fetch API is also depends on a promise. So how exactly the promise work, how it's written the data, what is resolve and reject, and why we are writing here something like dot then and dot catch with the fetch, because this particular syntax is so much simple. If I explain you this much initially, you will get to know, okay, fine, this is the fetch API, you have to use it like as it is. That's it. But why we are using this particular fetch API or fetch library in this format? So that thing I want that you should know. So that's why some slides until we have explained. So this is the fetch API. Okay. So fetch API says that I want to fetch the data from this particular URL. And what I will do it by means of a await and async function. Yeah, sorry. Or I can do it by means of a dot then and dot catch. So this is nothing but a fetch API. So fetch API says that I'm requesting some data from this URL. You are going to provide me the response. If response is available, I'm going to convert it. That response, I don't want the raw response. I want the data from the response. I'm just returning this response.json to the nested then. As soon as get the data from the response, I'll just console it. And if I get the error, I will catch it here. If you don't want to use this fetch, then catch, then you can use it by means of a functions also. So, but here you have to need the await. Until the whole complete executions happens, until that particular time, you have to await it. So that's why await and asyncs you have to mention if you are not using directly like this. So same thing is there. Await response.json, you are getting the data in the data variable. If no, then in a catch, you are getting the error. So this is the fetch API. So next, we will understand how exactly, so we just find out the syntax, how exactly the fetch API and how it works internally and how it's evolved from promise to the fetch API. And before promise also, we are using some XML HTTP request and responses, right? So that thing also we will cover. But I just want to introduce this syntax to you. But to introduce this syntax, I just have to went through the all previous actually concepts, how exactly the fetch API evolves. Okay, so history always matters, and always you will thoroughly understand why exactly we are doing like this and what exactly it is. So next we will understand internally how it works, what is the documentation is guiding us in a next video.